All right, we are doing this again for the third time. So I think we are live. Yes, I do believe we are live. So new season 2022 Formula One. And it's going to be a bummer of a season based on what happened last year. I am a mental performance coach and I work with athletes and professional athletes. And my interest really is in neuroscience, linguistics, and the words that people use when they speak and how that influence their performance. We take in the world through our 5 senses, and our brain processes that information, and how we internalize that comes out in our behavior and the words that we use. And that's why I focus so much on that, because if any person can focus on that and change that, they can change the trajectory of their performance and their life for that matter. So what we're going to do this year, specifically around Formula One, I became intrigued last year when I listened to Lewis Hamilton and Max Verstappen's interviews that the journalists with them would have. And I would hear these words and I would like, oh my goodness, you don't say that, because your mind only does what it thinks you want. That's an important concept to grasp. Your mind only does what it thinks you want. And I also made the remark last year to some people that Lewis never answers the question. He's never straight on the question, at least for some part. Well, not never, for the most part. And people would say, yeah, but he got in trouble previously for speaking too much and this and that. Yes, maybe, but still it is an indication of what his internal state is if you look at the specific words he used. And the same goes for Max Verstappen. So what I did is I analyzed a year or 12 pages of interview scripts across the 2 testing weekends. We're going to look at that. I'm going to highlight some words that were used by both of them. I am looking for a third driver that I will throw into the mix. Otherwise, I'm going to probably be biased if I only focus on these 2. But I'll wait after this weekend for obvious reasons to see who that would be. If you have a suggestion who I should take, please drop that in the comments. As long as it is not an athlete that is struggle with English, that finds it hard to speak in English and must be fairly fluent in English. And then I'll also start to take the team principles as well from next week onwards. The videos that I've used, I will link them all in the description below. I found them all on YouTube. There might be videos that I haven't seen, just because there are different channels that post different snippets of the videos. And other than the press conferences, which is pretty much the entire video that I can find. So on day 1, the 23rd, we are now in the testing weekend in Barcelona on the 23rd of February. There was the drivers, I'm going to focus on 2. The driver's reaction is when the journalists sort of stopped them somewhere on the paddock and asked them how things went, or somewhere in the venue, got a hold of them and asked them how it went. There's obviously a place where the journalist would stay and be and find them there. It's not so official as the press conference. And those 2, so the drivers' reactions and the press conference that were held with the drivers. So those were the 2 videos that I looked at. And like I said, I only used Lewis and I only used Max. With the driver's reaction, they don't post normally. For the videos that I've watched, they don't post the question the journalist asks. So you can sort of figure out what was the question. We don't really need to know what was the question. If we wanted to know whether the person answered the right question, then yes. But I still got a lot of good information based on the words that they use. Also going to look at things that we call metaphors. You also get metaphors of movement. I'm not an expert of metaphors in movement per se, but it is an extremely interesting side of performance coaching, or even therapy for that matter, where people use certain phrases and certain metaphors to describe their internal state, to actually describe what's internally. You do it subconsciously. It's not something you do consciously. For the most part. So the journalist asked Max Verstappen something, and then Max said, "We're getting used to the car. We get a general good understanding." And you will see the words that Max Verstappen uses are all words about movement, going forward, making progression. I say when I look at the differences between the two, they both remind me they are both on their way to base camp in the middle somewhere. But Max is coming downhill. Hell of an adventure. He's coming downhill, love it, excited about it. Lewis is coming uphill to base camp, and it's a struggle. You need to work through stuff. He's wondering. So you get the picture. So if you listen to the, and I'm going to highlight the words. If you listen to the words I'm highlighting, you will see sort of why I'm using that analogy. Max Verstappen uses words like things working quite well today. It's a good start. Things are holding up. Now, when you literally physically, again, that's an analogy, that's a metaphor, because if you have to like pick something up and hold it up like the spoon to hold something up, it means that you are supporting it, or there is support. There's a sense of support and a sense of stability. Then the pre-season testing press conference, 24th of February, the journalist started, Lewis was in the room first, started off. He asked Lewis, how excited and energized are you for this season, for this coming race this weekend, obviously. And then Lewis he always starts off, or he tries to, in some of his interviews, tries to make some small talk. Guys, everyone, we haven't seen anyone. I have my suspicions as to why he's trying to do that. It sort of almost feels out of place the way he does it. But I do have suspicion. I'll sort of watch things over the course of the season. And then he says, yeah, they got there this morning, arriving, walking around, looking at everybody's cars. And then he says, I think it's one of the most exciting and interesting seasons. And that's not what the journalist asked him. He wanted to know from Lewis how he feels. So when you ask somebody, how excited and energized are you, it's about the excitement you feel inside of you. It's not about whether something outside of you, in this case, the season he's speaking about, whether that's going to be exciting or interesting for that matter. And then he speaks about it's going to be interesting to see where everyone else comes out. So he's again speaking about the something, it's a thing or a person outside of him. And you're going to see that in a lot of his interviews. Unless, and I'm going to show it to you, unless he really becomes, he turns inwards, he becomes vulnerable and really tap into his inner state almost. But I'll show that to you as well. Then the journalist sort of tries to go back to the question and ask him about curiosity and intrigue. The fact that, remember now with Mercedes, they've been at the 2014 was the last time they had these big rule changes, and sort of trying to gauge that. Does it excite them to have these big changes and things like that? And he asked, he said, Lewis, you said you were looking around. So just what's your thoughts around that? And then you sort of go back again. I also have to say the journalists should learn to ask proper questions, right? Because they ask like 3 different questions in one sentence. I think every year is exciting, but of course in previous years it was an evolution. Now that's a word that he uses, and he uses the word development a lot. This whole thing about we are creating something, we are it's not quite, it's the whole sense of there's not a start and stop date. That's what we normally talk about. An experience always. So understand that I don't talk about this from a technical perspective. Formula One season is one big project that's being developed, right? You start off with a project and you develop throughout the entire year, whether it's your car, your drivers, your team, doesn't matter. And there's an outcome at the end of the year and a goal at the end of the year. That's not what I'm talking about, because within that big project, you still have shorter goals that will still need a start and an end date. And if you as an individual, and we talk a lot about when it comes to goal planning and what your day looks like, if there is not a thing that stops you, a stop date, a stop activity, something that shows you I have arrived, you would not know whether you've achieved the outcome that you wanted to achieve. So that's the whole thing around that. Then he speaks about, we'll figure out at some point why certain teams have chosen a certain route with the cars. So he speaks about other teams, other people. And then again, I think it's the most exciting one. And again, you have absolutely no idea where you stand. Actually, the first time where he speaks about where you stand, implying them, he uses this phrase a few times, no idea where you stand. So now, what you have to understand with metaphors as well is that if somebody uses an analogy or a metaphor like that, their internal state indicates that that is what they experience, and that's what they in their internal reality see and experience. It's not like he's in a space literally now speaking to the journalist and he's like looking around, he's like, I have no idea where to stand type of it's not that reality, right? So but that's the whole interesting thing about metaphors and when people use that. So talks about no idea where to stand, which implies confusion in his internal state. Then the journalist asked a question, well, sort of on the same trend, and asked a question about whether how do they see the competition, specifically with Ferrari. And then he mentioned, again, he said, well, if you go back, it's just really an exciting time. It was interesting, the phrase that he used about going back. Obviously, things that are in the past that have already happened, it's more comfortable to go back in your mind to that because it's familiar. Whether it's good or bad, it doesn't matter, but your mind will go back to that because it's familiar. And again, he mentioned you don't know where everyone stands at the moment, mentioned that again. So now he implies that other people, oh no, it's not this part, but yeah, again, you don't know where you stand, implies confusion in his internal state. And then yeah, he speaks about this, uses the word develop, start developing. Now again, I'm saying I'm not talking about technical development. I am purely looking at the words they use and what that could say from the internal state as a mental performance coach. Then they went on to speak about his time off and his break in the winter break. He just asked, the journalist asked, while they were away, were he aware of the changes that they've made to the car in terms of development and stuff like that? He answered that, but actually, he just said, I followed closely last year what they did through the developmental phase, but as soon as he went away, he has shut down completely. Which is interesting because if that's the case, he means he if not even had contact with his team, and he was just with his family. And then he spoke. Then the journalist asked, "I was wondering if there was anything that your mom or dad said to you, any words of wisdom that they gave to you that stuck with you to keep you motivated, to keep you in F1." Of course, we know there were rumors whether he's going to continue this season or not, and or was there a complete ban about talking about F1? Lewis only answered the last question. He said there wasn't a complete ban, but obviously he and his dad speak a little bit about it. But now what was interesting is you could start to see the shift in his internal state when he started to talk about something that he is clearly grounded in that you can see, because you can see the stuff that he is confident speaking about and that he is grounded in his entire state change. Now, what we mean when we say an individual state change is there is and physical state and emotional state is there are gestures that changes, and you can see something has shifted inside of them. You can use IQs to identify whether they had a state change. An easy way to explain it is if you speak to somebody and you look at the person and you just said what you said, and just by looking at the person, you realize, oh gosh, that was the wrong thing to say. It's because you reacted to a state change inside of them without you even knowing it. but it's a powerful thing in communication if you can pick that up to change the direction of the communication to prevent conflict. The moment you realize that it didn't sit right now with that individual, what you've said. So anyway, and he said there wasn't a ban, but it was the last thing he really wanted to talk about. And then he said, yeah, oh, I said it. He speak to his dad about things like that. And then he said, which I know sometimes in life, we get so focused and stuck into certain things like work that we forget to do those things. So it was a great time of just refreshing with them, really. And it was the best period of time I've actually ever had with my family. And if you look on the video, they had their masks on, which is a good and a bad thing. When you have the mask on, you can only focus on the IQs, the upper face, to identify those state changes, which focuses you to really zone in. So it does make it a little bit more difficult, but actually it helps you to sort of, people like us, to improve our skills in terms of reading body language. But there is where you could clearly see the change and clearly see the difference in terms of expression on his face. Then what was interesting at that immediate point, that the camera shot was just up and until there, below their chin. So it was a close-up, a big close-up of their face. And I was wondering, because at that time, the journalist went on to ask another question, and somewhere in between, Lewis stopped him and said, can the cameraman please zoom out? But he said to get our sponsors in, right? Like they have sponsors on there, like I have, sponsors on their shirt, so that they legitimate request. I was just one, because he made the remark. If he didn't make this remark, I would not have thought weird about it. But he made this remark, don't go too close. You can almost see our pores. So, which made me wonder that could he see that moment of vulnerability on the camera when he spoke about the time he spent with his family. That's what I am wondering about. Then the journalist asked him during the winter break whether he thought that he would sit there again, implying that as he thought that he would be back again and stuff like that. And whether the fact that he was with his family and switched off completely, do you feel that's actually helped you in some respects prepare even more mentally for the season going forward? And then he says, yeah, naturally at the end of every season, I think for those that are at his age, think about your career, right? And you think about these things, and he always evaluates his options. Now, remember now, in this space where he is answering these types of questions, he's talking about I, me and I. And then he also goes on to say, ultimately, I love what I do. I love being part of a team. I love working with, and I've said it many times, but working with everyone towards a common goal. What is interesting, and I'll keep on obviously listening to the interviews that we have available throughout the season, but I've never heard him, he's obviously said it maybe previously, years before, I don't know. But in what I have reviewed here is he never mentions, I love racing. You would hear Max Verstappen says it all the time. I love being in the car. I love racing. I love on being on the track. But Lewis always speaks about, I love being part of the team. I love working towards a common goal. I love, it's always about the team. So yes, the thing, now people might reason, yeah, but he's a good team player. That's not necessarily the case. Historically, and I've managed teams for 20 years, but historically, you were taught, if you have a team and you manage a team, though, if they speak about us, us the team, and it's always about the team, that they are great team players, and that's not necessarily the case. It can also be a case of the distancing yourself and putting yourself outside of something that you don't see yourself as a part of. Then you start to speak about stuff outside of you. Then the journalist asked about, do we need proper definitions about racing rules, alluding to the especially who have the rights to corners? You would remember last year there were some instances in different races and controversy around who has the right to a corner and things like that. and he didn't answer the question. Lewis said, I want to see more women in the stewards room. And he spoke about diversity now, women. So I guess we will still, it seems like that's now the new thing he's promoting. So I guess we'll hear a lot about that going forward. He did chime in, one of the other drivers were, after they spoke, Lewis did chime back in to say that I think he had a little bit of time to think about what he has said, but they need to get non-biased stewards in the control room, or in the not the control room, but because, and he went on to speak that there were teams that were very good friends with some of these race directors and stuff like that. That could contribute to the bias. Then the journalist asked me, have you bumped into Max? Have you had a quick chat? Are you planning to? And he said, strangely enough, he looked to his right, to Daniel Ricciardo. It's almost like if he was waiting for his permission. And so they must have spoken about it, the type of question, or they might have spoken, or maybe Daniel Ricciardo asked him the same question at some point throughout the weekend. Well, actually, they just got there. But Lewis said, I just got there. I haven't seen him from a distance. And he said it's probably the closest we will come. Oh, then they spoke about the grid moment. You guys will remember that in the Formula, I think it's start of 2020 season, they brought in what they call the grid moment for social issues, and to show their solidarity with social issues at that time, like Black Lives Matter and the death of George Floyd. And they've scrapped that now. So I completely agree with that. I do not believe that politics, I understand there will always be politics in sport, but that extent of politics should be involved in sport. If there is a social cause or a social justice issue or whatever, do that off track. It's my personal opinion. Let the athletes focus on what they need to do when they get there, and let the people focus on the sport. And you know what I was thinking, actually, that if they do, and yes, now people will come and say, but yeah, they are like these big icons, but then celebrities are also big icons. So let the celebrities do that if they looking for somebody to sort of do that. All right, so on the 24th of February, again, drivers' press conference. This time Max was there, and the journalist asked him, give us your thoughts on how it went yesterday. This is now day 2. How big an achievement was the fact that they got a lot of laps, again, given the size of the rule change. Max said it's always a bit of a question initially where you're going to start and how things is going to go. But now, again, same type of words that he uses in terms of it was a very positive day. We get to know the car, so it sort of implies progress. Getting up to speed, moving forward implies progress, and very positive and enjoyable. These are the types of words that Max used in his response. Then journalists ask him again about the predictions of the cars that had to be very stiff for this ground effect, and that caused them to be sluggish under braking and things like that. The phenomenon about the bouncing, porpoising, like they call it now. Max said that it's stiff about it before, but I don't mind. It's enjoyable, just a bit different. It's a learning phase. Now, these are just the words that I'm picking out. Obviously, he said more than that. In his sentence, he spoke sentences, right? But with these words in there, using the words of nice, high-speed corners is quite nice. It thinks it might be easier to stay behind. Things are more under control, fine. So it's all words that he uses implying, I almost want to say stability, feeling good, know where they stand, that type of thing. Then the journalist asked him over the off-season, did he have time to reflect on things that he wants to improve this season? He just mentioned that you always think about it. There's always a lot of things that you want to do better every single year. And then he said he spoke about experience and using experience to learn, and then getting on top, and he used the word getting on top of everything as a driver. So on top of, so you can imagine that if you stand on top of something, like on top of a staircase, on top of the mountain, first of all, you feel in control, you feel big, and you have a much better awareness of what's going on around you. So when people use that type of analogy and that type of phrase, their inner state speaks about, I am in control and I am aware of what's going on around me. Then a journalist asked him whether a driver would be able to make a big difference given the changes to the car. And he said individually, you can make a difference, just generally all in a positive way. I think Max Verstappen got criticized last year and probably still do of the fact that irrespective of what is being thrown at him or the team or the sport itself, he will always find a way out of it, which is a great characteristic to have. Especially you want to teach your kids that type of characteristics, but I do think obviously got a lot of he was a lot of negative publicity because of that and the way he operates within that state. And which is, I have to say, as personally, as a mental performance coach, I would love my athletes to have that mental state. The last thing that needs to happen is that if they are on the track or on in an event or in a race or in a game, depending on the sport they do, I mean, gosh, if you're swimming out in the sea and you have to go and swim for 2 kilometers and something unexpectedly happens a kilometer out, you need to be able to adjust fairly quickly, even if it means that you have to take some risks. Well, probably not in the sea, too much risk, but you get what I'm saying. Driver's Day 3 reaction, 25 February. Don't know what was the question asked. It was to Lewis, and now Lewis had an opportunity to drive the car. He went around the track. And these are the words he uses. Obviously, give an entire response, but these are the words, not being the easiest. Almost smooth running. There's obstacles to overcome. We go through as much as we could. We want more laps. Working our way through it. So it's almost this. It's this analogy that I've used in the beginning. It's like they are trying to go uphill and they have this resistance. It's all about. It reflects resistance when you start to use these types of words. Max Verstappen said, no, I think it's fine. The car runs really well. Really enjoy driving the car. It's a nice, stable car. Look cool, nice to jump into. So you see the difference between the two. Now, you might say, and again, I'm not, there are technical aspects that is reality. They might, I mean, technical, I personally think the issues that Mercedes is experiencing, because if you look at the state of Lewis, when they had some of these interviews, he did look worried and frustrated and cheesed off. I don't think that's something that he would fake. So yes, you do experience, there's the reality of experience certain issues, but as an athlete, you want to discourage your, as a coach, you want to discourage your athlete from using these types of words. You can still say the fact that you are working through challenges and whatever you're working through, you don't have to deny that. But you have to use better words and better phrases, because remember, again, your mind only does what it thinks you want. For example, my son would always, and it's a habit, it's a thing. Most of these things are stuff that we do unconsciously. But again, your mind only does what it thinks you want. So he would say so many times, he would say, we would have a conversation and then he would say, but the problem is, and I've stopped him now with that, because what he is talking about is not a problem. It might be a challenge. It might be something you need to figure out. It might be something exciting he needs to do, but it's definitely not a problem. Then we move to Bahrain. Pre-season testing in Bahrain, the weekend of the 9th of March, 10th of March. So the driver's press conference on day 1. The journalist asked Max Verstappen, what's the goal for you and the team at this final pre-season test? Max said laps and understand the car more. So he speaks about, when Max speaks, he speaks about, unless depending on the question, but he speaks about you, me, I, whereas Lewis speaks a lot about stuff outside of him. I've mentioned that, as if he is not part of that. And we talk about that as a third-person view, or second person. First person means you are in the situation. And second person means you are outside of the situation. And third person means that you are in a distance looking down on the first and the second person, if I can call it like that. It's almost like the jury between two individuals, even to go one step further. Then there was the driver's day reaction. Don't know what was the question that the journalist, actually we know. It was the question he asked about if he started off, and the journalist said, I mean, if we just look at Mercedes car very quickly, and Max Verstappen interrupted him and said it's ugly. Driver's Day 2 reaction, 11 March. Don't know what the journalist asked, but Lewis responded, used these words again, working through, trying to figure out, hold on to downforce. If you literally have to hang on to something, it's tough, it's difficult, it's effort. So the fact that he uses the analogy to hold on to something, he could have said, understand the downforce better, or something like that. But so you start to understand how the words that you use give us an indication of an individual's internal state. He says it's difficult out there, it's bumpy, it's slippery, it's sand, it's too hot, it's dusty. And that was actually, I think that was the sort of the snippet where really he looked cheesed off. He wasn't that happy. Then on the 12th of March was Lewis's post interview, post testing interview. Again, don't know what was the question the journalist asked, but think about the quickest, or do you think you're going to win, or something like that? And then Lewis just said, no, at the moment we're not. I'm sure everyone can kind of figure that out. We're not the quickest at the moment. And then he starts to speak again about Ferrari. So this is also interesting when Lewis do go into I, or something he needs to answer about the team or himself. It's just almost the first sentence, and then after that he again goes on to other people and speak about other teams, and then he went on to say again, it's definitely tough out there, windy, tough. He mentions the word again. He mentions wind, bouncing, worse, working through lots of different scenarios. So his mind is really going through an uphill battle in understanding what the heck is going on. Again, bouncing and bumping. He did say not quite happy, trying to time her. That was interesting that he referred to his car as a woman. He said it's a different machine, there's hurdles, not smooth run. So not going to be a smooth run. So yeah, you can find all of these. I almost want to say resistant words that he's using as to how he describe his experience. Then on the 12th of March, a journalist asked, you've completed your last mileage. What sort of shape are you and your team in? It was again for Lewis. We got through our test program. We had decent reliability, but then he went back immediately again and said, everyone is struggling. I think everyone is struggling. It's bumpy. There's still lots of work to do. That we are knowing that we still have a lot of work to do. Again, he speaks about this effort. Then in that moment, well, the journalist asked him, well, you say you got a lot of work to do. Is there an underlying confidence still within the team? And Lewis, in that moment, again, his state completely changed because you can clearly see when Lewis speaks with conviction. There's a confidence that we can always work through whatever problem we're facing. But then the journalist asked him, if so, we were to go racing tomorrow, pole position, race win, or where do you think you'll end up? Immediately, state change. It's almost like downhill spiral, change completely. And obviously, he said, no, at the moment, we're not. So people are saying, again, like I mentioned in the beginning, or there's this whole conversation going around, are they sandbagging? Are they bluffing? Are they this? Are they that? I don't think so. I really do think that they have real problems. I do understand, I've not been able to verify it, but I do understand that they've flown in a new floor for the car. So yeah, so I do think they, whether they can get everything together before this afternoon's first practice run remains to be seen, but I do think they are worried, at least Lewis is, given if you look at his behavior and his body language and things like that. Yeah, and that is it. Some other snippets there. I will keep you guys posted. It's going to be an exciting weekend for us. I think in 30 minutes for me, yeah, it's between 2 and 3 Bahrain time. So that starts in about 30 minutes for me. Will be the first practice run. We're going to be exciting to see what's going on there. And then next week, obviously, I'll speak about the interviews that was done over the weekend and what is going on there. And I am going to try my best to include the team principles, as I mentioned, depending just on how much work that will end up to be, but I really want to do that. And then I am, like I said, looking for a third driver. If you have suggestions, put that in the comment section. And then obviously their particular race, team principle. Just remember, not somebody that is who speaks English difficult. That's going to be hard to really sort of analyze behavior and things like you could. But things get lost, literally. Things get lost in translation, right? Because you can have a meaning for a word that a lot of different meanings for a particular word in a language. So that's completely open for interpretation unless you speak and work with the individual directly and you can ask them, what do they mean by that? But we don't have that opportunity.